My name is Eva, and if there's one thing I've always known about myself, it's that I was meant for more than an ordinary life. I'm not talking about basic contentment. I'm talking about the kind of life you see in magazines, the kind that feels significant. For 5 years, the man standing beside me, the one I thought would be there when I finally reached that life, was Daniel. When we met, Daniel was everything I needed. He was a talented architect, a few years older than me, with a quiet confidence that felt like gravity. He was stable. While I was a chaotic whirlwind of ideas and ambitions, fresh out of college and trying to make a name for myself in marketing, Daniel was my anchor. He was already established in his career, already owned a small condo, already knew how the world worked. He was my rock, and I loved him for it. I can't even count the nights we spent on the floor of his condo, drinking cheap wine and sketching out our future on napkins. He'd draw floor plans for our dream house, a modern place with huge windows and a big backyard, and I'd map out my career trajectory, showing him how I'd climb the ladder from junior associate to chief marketing officer. He listened. He really did. He'd smile that slow, steady smile of his and tell me he had no doubt I could do anything I set my mind to. He helped me create my first real budget, celebrated every tiny promotion with a fancy dinner he couldn't really afford, and held me when I came home crying after a brutal day at the office. We were a team, building something solid. But somewhere along the way, maybe around year 3 or 4, the things I once loved about him started to feel different. His stability began to feel like stagnation. His practicality started to sound a lot like pessimism. The dream house in the suburbs he was so diligently saving for started to feel less like a dream and more like a cage. My world was expanding. I was getting noticed at work, networking with people who owned yachts and took spontaneous trips to Paris. I started to crave that. I didn't want to just save for a sensible future. I wanted to live now. The friction started with small things. I'd point out a stunning designer handbag, a classic that would be an investment piece for my burgeoning career, and he'd gently remind me how much closer that money would get us to the down payment on our house. His voice would be calm and reasonable, which somehow made it even more infuriating. It felt like he was treating me like a child who didn't understand value. Then I started coming to him with bigger ideas. What if I started my own consulting firm? I'd ask, my eyes wide with excitement. Instead of mirroring my energy, he'd get that thoughtful, furrowed brow I grew to despise. He'd ask questions. What would the startup costs be? How would we cover our expenses while you build a client base? What's the risk profile? They were his architect questions, as he called them. Practical, logical, designed to build something that wouldn't collapse. But to me, they sounded like a list of reasons why I would fail. I started to feel a chasm opening between us. He was content building his life brick by sensible brick, while I wanted to launch myself into the stratosphere. The more I tried to pull him into my world of ambition and risk, the more he seemed to retreat into his shell of security. I saw his caution not as love or protection, but as fear. He was afraid to take a leap. And what I started to fear most was that he was trying to make me afraid too. The man who was once my rock was starting to feel like an anchor, holding me in a safe, shallow harbor while a whole ocean of possibilities was waiting for me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I was not meant to stay in the harbor forever. The more I was looking for arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as an email with the subject line, "Catching Up and an Opportunity." It was from Julian, a charismatic acquaintance I knew from a few marketing conferences. He was a quintessential tech bro visionary, always talking in buzzwords like disruption, synergy, and paradigm shift. He had left his cushy job to start a new company, a high-concept tech firm called Elysian, which aimed to use AI to create personalized luxury travel experiences. The email was brief, asking to meet. He said he had a proposition that was perfect for someone with my talent and ambition. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. We met for coffee the next day. Julian was electric, painting a picture of a future where Elysian was the go-to platform for the global elite. He told me they weren't just selling travel, they were selling a lifestyle. Then he dropped the bomb. They had their tech guys, they had their finance guys, but they needed a marketing visionary to build the brand from the ground up. He wasn't offering me a job. He was offering me a seat at the table. Director of Marketing and founding partner, he said, his eyes gleaming. There would be a generous equity package, one that could be worth millions in a few years. I felt dizzy with excitement, my hands trembling as I held my coffee cup. And then came the catch. To ensure all the founding partners were fully invested, both financially and emotionally, each was required to contribute a significant buy-in. And for the first year, until they secured their Series A funding, there would be no salary. It was a test of faith, he explained, in the company and in ourselves. The buy-in amount he quoted made my breath catch in my throat. It was, almost to the dollar, the entire amount Daniel and I had painstakingly saved for our house deposit. The rational part of my brain, the small part that still sounded like Daniel, flickered for a second before being completely extinguished by the roaring fire of my ambition. This wasn't a risk. It was a launching pad. The first person I called was Maya. Before I could even finish explaining, she was screaming into the phone. "Oh my God, Eva? Are you kidding me? A founding partner? That's insane. You have to do it. Forget that boring corporate ladder. This is a rocket ship." "But the buy-in is all of our house money," I said, a test to see if she'd bring me back to earth. "So what?" she shot back instantly. "You'll be able to buy 10 houses when the company goes public. This is the definition of a power move. Daniel is going to be so proud. He has to be." Her words were the only validation I needed. She understood. She saw the vision. I practically floated home that evening, rehearsing my speech. I'd lay out the whole vision, the potential, the sheer brilliance of it all. I'd make him see that this wasn't losing our savings, it was planting a magic bean that would grow into a castle. He was late, held up at a site, and I spent the time pacing our small living room, my body thrumming with nervous energy. When he finally walked in, looking tired and smelling of sawdust and concrete, I didn't even give him a chance to put his bag down. I launched into my pitch, my words tumbling over each other as I described Elysian, the equity, the future where we'd be drinking champagne on a private jet. He listened patiently, his architect's focus on full display. When I finally finished, breathless and beaming, he didn't jump up and down. He didn't grab me and spin me around. He took off his work boots, sat down heavily on the sofa, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Okay," he said slowly, his voice calm, too calm. "Let me make sure I understand this. Julian, the guy who thinks synergy is a personality trait, wants you to quit your stable, well-paying job. It's not just a job, Daniel, it's a—" "Let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "He wants you to quit your job, earn zero income for at least a year, and invest every single dollar we have saved for our future into his brand new company that has no product and no revenue." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Is that about right?" The way he laid it out, so starkly and stripped of all the glamour, made it sound insane. He made me sound insane. A cold wave of defensive anger washed over me. "You're twisting it," I said, my voice sharp. "You're not even trying to see the potential. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "An opportunity for what, Eva?" he asked, his voice still maddeningly level. "An opportunity to be broke and in debt? Who are the other investors? What's their business plan? What happens when the money runs out in 6 months?" He wasn't celebrating with me. He was interrogating me. He wasn't my partner, he was my risk assessor. And in that moment, all I could see was the man who was supposed to be my biggest supporter, methodically listing all the ways I was about to fail. He hadn't said no, not yet, but I already knew. He didn't believe in me. Chuck Junroy. De la Fundrykokochet, Tiptuk Vakaknyan Vatmoila Eva, Daniel Vamaya. Part 3. The Escalation. My dream versus his fear. The space between us in the living room crackled with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. The fight that followed was uglier than any we'd ever had. It was a hurricane of accusations, fueled by years of my own quiet resentments. "I can't believe you," I finally spat out, the words dripping with contempt. "For 5 years I've supported your stable, predictable career. I went to every boring work dinner, listened to you talk for hours about building codes and zoning laws, but the one time I have a chance to do something spectacular, you try to shoot it down." "Shoot it down?" he countered, his voice rising for the first time. "Eva, I'm trying to stop us from driving off a cliff. This isn't a career move, it's a lottery ticket, and you want to pay for it with our entire future. It's my future too, and I see something more for myself than this tiny condo and a 30-year mortgage in the suburbs. I'm sorry if my ambition scares you. I was screaming now, tears of rage blurring my vision. You're not scared for us, you're scared I'll succeed. You're scared I'll outgrow you and your safe little world. That hit him. I saw the flash of deep hurt in his eyes before it was replaced by a cold fury. That's what you think of me? After all this time, he said, his voice dangerously low. That I'm a small man who wants to keep you down? He shook his head, looking at me as if I were a stranger. This conversation is over. He walked into the bedroom and shut the door, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our living room. I spent the night on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket that felt as cold as his silence. The next morning, I was a woman on a mission. His reaction hadn't filled me with doubt. It had filled me with a righteous, defiant certainty. He was wrong, and I would prove it. My first call was to Maya. I recounted the fight, carefully editing his words to make him sound like a condescending, controlling villain. He basically called me stupid and irresponsible, I told her, a manipulative twist I felt zero guilt about. Maya's outrage was immediate and immensely satisfying. I knew it. That is classic insecure man behavior, Eva. He can't handle the idea of you being the breadwinner, the visionary. Don't you dare let him clip your wings. This is your moment. Emboldened, I sent a follow-up email to Julian at Elysian, asking a few strategic questions, designed not to get information, but to get reassurance. I asked about their risk mitigation strategy, and he sent back a PDF full of impressive-looking charts and a confident paragraph about their agile, pivot-ready model. It meant nothing, but it looked professional. It was the armor I needed. For 3 days, Daniel and I moved around each other like ghosts in our own home. The silence was suffocating. Then, on the 4th evening, he tried to bridge the gap. He came into the living room where I was pretending to read a book and sat on the coffee table opposite me. Ava, he began softly. I hate this. I've been thinking, and I want to find a way to support you without being irresponsible to our partnership. I waited, my jaw tight. What if we compromise? He offered. Don't quit your job yet. Work with them on the side for 6 months. If they hit their funding targets, we can reevaluate. Or, use only the money from your personal savings account, not the joint one. Let's not bet the whole farm, just a corner of it. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Let me meet them. Let me see the business plan. I build things for a living, Eva. Let me help you see if the foundation is solid. I stared at him, my heart turning to ice. A compromise. A test run. He wanted me to audition for my own dream. He wanted to review my life's great opportunity, as if it were one of his blueprints, searching for structural flaws. It was the most profound insult he could have delivered. It proved he didn't trust my judgment, my vision, or me. I closed my book with a snap. No, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. That's not support, Daniel. That's you hedging your bets. It's you needing a safety net, because you don't believe I can fly. I stood up, looking down at him. This is an all-or-nothing opportunity, and I needed you to be all in. You're either my partner in this, 100%, or you're just an obstacle. The hope in his eyes died. He just nodded slowly, as if a final, painful realization had dawned on him. The next day, during my lunch break, I walked to the bank. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign the transfer form. Every fiber of my being, every lesson Daniel had ever taught me about being careful and responsible, was screaming at me to stop. But another voice, louder and more seductive, whispered that this was what greatness felt like. This was the moment of courage that separated the dreamers from the doers. I pushed the form across the counter. As I walked out of the bank and into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I didn't feel like I had just betrayed my partner. I felt like I had finally chosen myself. A line had been crossed, and I had been the one to draw it. I didn't tell him. I thought childishly that if I didn't mention the money, it was as if it hadn't happened. I would work hard, the company would succeed, and I'd replace the funds tenfold before he even noticed. He'd be so impressed, so proud that the initial betrayal would be forgotten, a mere footnote in my success story. That fantasy lasted for exactly 2 days. He found out on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, making coffee with the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to pretend everything was normal. He walked out of the bedroom, phone in his hand, his face pale and utterly blank. He didn't look angry. He looked hollowed out. "The money's gone, Eva," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the flat finality of an obituary. "I got a notification from the bank. You transferred everything." I opened my mouth to launch into one of my prepared speeches about vision and investment, but the look in his eyes stopped me. The trust he had for me, the bedrock of our entire relationship, was gone. I had taken a sledgehammer to it. "I had to, Daniel," I whispered, my voice sounding weak and pathetic even to my own ears. "It was the only way." "The only way to do what?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "The only way to prove that my opinion, our partnership, meant absolutely nothing to you?" He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet devastation in his voice was worse than any shouting match. "I asked you not to. That's all this comes down to. I asked you, as your partner, not to risk our entire future on a gamble, and you went behind my back and did it anyway. After that, our home became a dead zone. We were no longer partners. We were two resentful strangers sharing a mortgage. He started working longer hours, picking up side projects, sometimes staying at the office until well past midnight. A part of me knew he was doing it because he was now carrying the entire financial weight of our lives on his shoulders. He was stressed, exhausted, and running on fumes to keep us afloat. But my pride, my all-consuming need to be right, refused to see it that way. I interpreted his exhaustion as disapproval. His silence wasn't the quiet of a man overwhelmed with responsibility. It was the passive-aggressive punishment of a man silently screaming, "I told you so." Every time he came home too tired to ask about my day at Elysian, I felt a fresh wave of resentment. How dare he not be my cheerleader? How dare he not share in the excitement of my incredible journey? The truth was, the journey wasn't that incredible. The glamorous life of a startup founder was a myth. My reality was 80-hour work weeks in a sterile, rented office space that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. It was endless, circular meetings with other founders who were just as stressed and inexperienced as I was. The thrill was wearing off, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The pressure to succeed was immense, because failure wasn't just failure, it was proving Daniel right. That pressure led to my next betrayal. The startup had endless small expenses, software subscriptions, marketing materials, lunches for potential investors that went nowhere. With no salary and no operating budget, I started using our joint credit card. At first, it was just a small charge here and there. Things I told myself were emergencies. But soon it became my default. A $50 charge for a LinkedIn premium account. A $200 charge for business cards. A $500 charge for a last-minute flight to a tech conference I convinced myself was essential. I was a visionary, and visionaries couldn't be bogged down by petty cash flow problems. Daniel discovered it when the monthly statement arrived. The card, which we kept for true emergencies, was completely maxed out. He confronted me that night, holding the paper statement in his hand as if it were contaminated. "Eva, what is this?" he asked, his voice tight with a new, harder edge. "This card is for a burst pipe or a medical bill. It is not a line of credit for your company." This time, I felt no guilt, only fury. "It's called investing in the business, Daniel," I shrieked, snatching the statement from his hand. "I can't believe you. Are you checking up on me now? Going through my expenses like I'm some kind of delinquent teenager?" "There are expenses. It's our credit." "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize my dream had to fit within our pre-approved monthly budget." I was hysterical, backed into a corner of my own making. "You don't get it. You have no idea what it takes. You sit in your safe little office, designing your safe little buildings while I'm out here trying to build an empire. And all you do is try to sabotage me, nickel and diming my every move." He just stared at me, the last traces of warmth in his eyes finally extinguished. He wasn't looking at the woman he loved anymore. He was looking at a liability, a black hole of ambition that was threatening to swallow everything they had ever built together. And I looked back at him, so completely convinced of my own narrative, that I saw not a man I had broken, but an enemy who was standing in my way. Chukchundroy. Telefon 5 ko chuyen. Diamdova ako'y kung kumoy kwanhe za Eva va Daniel. Part 5. The breaking point. 6 months into my grand adventure, the dream was dying. The vibrant, disruptive energy of Elysian had curdled into quiet desperation. The promised Series A funding was a mirage that kept receding every time we got close. Our burn rate was astronomical, and the initial buy-in from the founders had been incinerated. We were running on fumes, and the panic in the office was palpable. Julian, our charismatic leader, was now a pale, sweaty mess who spent his days on the phone, begging for meetings with venture capitalists who had long since stopped returning his calls. The breaking point came during a grim, late-night emergency strategy session. The founders concluded that our only hope was one last, desperate cash injection to keep the lights on for another quarter. They didn't call it that, of course. They framed it as a final push, a recommitment to the vision. They asked each of the founding partners to contribute more. It wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in the language of shared sacrifice. I drove home that night with a cold, hard knot of terror in my stomach. This couldn't be happening. If the company failed now, it meant everything. The fights, the lies, the money I'd stolen from our future. It would all be for nothing. It would mean that Daniel had been right all along. That was a reality I simply could not accept. My mind raced, scrambling for a solution, any solution, and it landed on the only asset we had left. The last sacred thing. I found Daniel in the kitchen, washing his dinner plate. He seemed to sense the frantic energy radiating off me as I walked in. He turned, his expression wary. "They need more money," I blurted out, forgoing any attempt at subtlety. "Just a final bridge fund to get us to the next round. It's our last hurdle, Daniel." He dried his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "There is no more money, Eva. You know that." "There is," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "There's the condo. We could take out a second mortgage. It would be more than enough." He stared at me for a long moment, and in his eyes I saw something shift. It was the last flicker of hope finally being extinguished, leaving behind something cold and hard as steel. He didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor at all. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it had the absolute finality of a slamming iron door. "What do you mean, no?" I stammered. "Daniel, this is to save everything." "Save what?" he asked, his voice lethally calm. "There is nothing left to save. You burned it all down." He took a step closer, and for the first time I felt afraid of the sheer force of his stillness. "This was never about your ambition, Eva. I was there for that. I was your biggest fan when you were a real career. This was about your ego. It was about your refusal to accept that you can't have a partner when the only person you're in a partnership with is yourself." He gestured around the small kitchen at the home he had built. "You wanted a financier, not a boyfriend. You wanted a blank check, not a sounding board. You took our savings, money we bled for. You destroyed our credit. And now, after all that, you have the audacity to stand here and ask me to set fire to the one thing I have left, the home I made for myself before you were ever in my life." He shook his head, a look of profound and weary sadness on his face. "It's over. I cannot be with someone I don't trust, and I don't trust you. I don't even recognize you anymore." His words, so calm and true, were like acid. I couldn't absorb them. I couldn't accept them.